Some people believe that talent is born, not made. Marcus Rivera had stopped believing in both. For 18 months, he had been the mechanic nobody trusted with the important jobs. The one who got called when the marina's top engineers had given up and moved on to more profitable repairs. His calloused hands, stained permanently black from years of wrestling with stubborn engines, had become accustomed to working miracles that no one ever witnessed. The small apartment above Sal's marine repair shop felt more like a prison cell than a home, its walls thin enough that he could hear every conversation about his failures drifting up from the workshop below. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His marriage to Carmen had ended 3 years ago, not with screaming fights or dramatic confrontations, but with the quiet resignation of two people who had simply stopped believing they could make each other happy. The divorce papers had arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who apologized for interrupting Marcus while he was elbow-deep in a corroded bilge pump. Carmen had taken their son Miguel with her to Phoenix, leaving behind only a forwarding address and a custody arrangement that allowed Marcus to see his boy every other weekend, when work permitted and when he could afford the plane ticket. The last real conversation Marcus had with Miguel was during their visit to the Santa Monica Pier 6 months ago. His 12-year-old son had looked at him with the kind of disappointment that only children can deliver with such devastating precision. "Dad, why can't you just get a normal job like other dads? Why do you always have to fix things that are already broken beyond repair?" The words had cut deeper than any criticism from his supervisors, any rejection letter from the engineering firms he'd applied to, any whispered comment about his drinking problem that everyone pretended not to notice. But Marcus had been sober for 14 months now, ever since the morning he'd woken up in his truck in the marina parking lot, surrounded by empty bottles, and the concerned face of Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who ran the waterfront diner. She had helped him to his feet with surprising strength for someone barely 5 feet tall, then walked him to the nearest AA meeting without saying a word about the shame that burned in his chest like acid. The meetings had become a lifeline, a place where other broken people gathered to admit that their lives had become unmanageable, and that maybe, just maybe, there was a way back to something resembling hope. Since then, Marcus had thrown himself into work with the desperate intensity of someone trying to prove that sobriety could transform failure into competence. He arrived at the shop every morning at 5:30, an hour before Sal unlocked the front door, and he stayed until the sun disappeared behind the Malibu hills, working on engines that other mechanics had declared impossible to repair. His reputation had begun to shift, slowly and quietly, from the guy who couldn't hold his life together to the guy who could resurrect marine engines that everyone else had written off as scrap metal. But reputation meant little when the bills kept piling up and the custody lawyers kept demanding payments he couldn't afford. The stack of unopened envelopes on his kitchen table told the story of a man who was staying afloat, but barely. Overdue notices from the electric company, threatening letters from credit card companies, and worst of all, a legal document informing him that Carmen was considering relocating to Seattle with Miguel for her new job, which would effectively end his already limited visitation rights unless he could demonstrate significant improvement in his financial stability. The other mechanics at Sal's treated Marcus with the polite distance reserved for people who had once been reliable but could no longer be trusted with the expensive jobs that paid well. They gave him the grunt work, the engines that were more rust than metal, the boats that their owners had already decided to abandon. It was honest work, but it was the kind of work that kept a man treading water without ever reaching the shore. On this particular Thursday morning in November, the marina was shrouded in the kind of fog that made everything look like a dream sequence from a movie. Marcus stood on the dock outside Sal's shop, drinking coffee from a thermos that had seen better decades and watching the expensive yachts bob in their slips like sleeping giants. The contrast between his own circumstances and the wealth that surrounded him was never more apparent than on mornings like this, when the fog created an intimate space that included both his modest repairs and the million-dollar vessels that represented the kind of life he'd once imagined he might achieve. The call came at 7:45, just as Marcus was settling into his first repair of the day, a temperamental outboard motor that belonged to a weekend fisherman who paid in cash and never asked questions about warranties. Sal's voice crackled over the shop's intercom system, with the kind of urgency that usually meant either very good news or very bad news, and in Marcus's experience, very good news was a rare commodity in the marine repair business. Rivera, drop whatever you're doing and get down to slip 47. Sal's voice carried the gravelly authority of a man who had spent 40 years fixing other people's mechanical problems and had developed strong opinions about efficiency and priorities. We've got a situation that requires your particular brand of expertise. Slip 47 was in the premium section of the marina, where the boats were less like recreational vehicles and more like floating palaces. Marcus had walked past these slips hundreds of times over the past 18 months, admiring the craftsmanship and engineering that went into vessels that cost more than most people's houses. He had never been called to work on any of them, partly because the owners of such boats typically employed specialized yacht technicians who commanded fees that made even luxury car mechanics look affordable, and partly because his reputation, while improving, had not yet recovered enough to warrant trust with truly valuable equipment. The yacht at Slip 47 was extraordinary, even by the elevated standards of the premium section. The vessel stretched nearly 120 feet from bow to stern, its sleek white hull reflecting the morning sun like polished marble. The name Serendipity was painted in elegant script near the bow, and everything about the boat suggested the kind of attention to detail that came from unlimited budgets and uncompromising standards. This was not the kind of vessel that ended up requiring the services of a mechanic who specialized in lost causes and desperate repairs. As Marcus approached the gangway, he noticed a small crowd gathered near the stern of the yacht. 3 men in expensive suits stood in a tight circle, their voices carrying the frustrated tones of people who were accustomed to having their problems solved quickly and efficiently. Beside them, a woman in her early 30s paced back and forth across the deck, her phone pressed to her ear as she conducted what sounded like a series of increasingly tense conversations with people who were apparently unable to provide the solutions she demanded. The woman was striking in the way that certain people commanded attention without seeming to try. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that somehow managed to look both professional and effortless, and her clothes, while clearly expensive, were chosen for function rather than display. She moved with a kind of confidence that suggested she was accustomed to being the person in charge, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders and the slight tremor in her free hand that indicated she was dealing with a problem that couldn't be solved with money or influence. "Are you the mechanic?" she asked, ending her phone call abruptly, and preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Turning to face Marcus with the kind of direct gaze that made him suddenly conscious of his stained work clothes and permanently dirty fingernails. The one they say can fix anything? Marcus felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that came with being thrust into situations where expectations exceeded his confidence in his abilities. The reputation that had preceded him to Slip 47 was apparently more generous than he'd realized, and he found himself wondering who had recommended him for whatever problem had brought together this collection of obviously frustrated people. "I'm Marcus Rivera from Sal's Marine Repair," he said, extending a hand that she shook with surprising firmness. "I understand you're having some engine trouble." The woman's laugh carried no humor, only the bitter edge of someone who had spent considerable time and money pursuing solutions that had failed to materialize. "Engine trouble doesn't begin to describe what we're dealing with here. I'm Victoria Hartwell, and this is my yacht, and as of 6 hours ago, it has become the most expensive paperweight in Southern California." One of the men in suits stepped forward, apparently feeling the need to provide additional context for Marcus's benefit. "Ms. Hartwell, perhaps we should explain the situation more thoroughly. This is a complex mechanical problem that has already defeated some of the most qualified marine engineers on the West Coast." Victoria's expression suggested that she had heard enough explanations and theories to last several lifetimes. "What Mr. Davidson is trying to say is that my yacht's main engine has developed a problem that 3 different specialists have declared impossible to fix without completely rebuilding the motor, which would cost approximately $800,000 and take 4 months, during which time the boat would be completely unusable." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise involuntarily. $800,000 was more money than he had made in the past 3 years combined, and the idea that someone would spend that amount on a single engine repair seemed to exist in a completely different universe from his own experience with marine mechanics. "The engine runs for approximately 15 minutes, Victoria continued, then shuts down completely and won't restart for several hours. The cooling system checks out fine, the fuel system has been completely rebuilt, and the electrical system has been tested by 2 different technicians who both swore they had identified and solved the problem. Marcus nodded, his mind already beginning to work through the possible causes of intermittent engine failure that could confound experienced technicians. In his experience, the problems that stumped experts were usually caused by something simple that had been overlooked because it didn't fit the expected pattern of expensive, complicated failures. "Has anyone checked the engine mounts?" he asked, the question emerging before he had fully considered whether it might sound naive to people who had already invested significant time and money in more sophisticated diagnostics. The silence that followed his question was telling. Mr. Davidson exchanged glances with his colleagues, and Victoria's expression shifted from frustration to something that might have been curiosity. "The engine mounts," Victoria repeated slowly. "Are you suggesting that a vibration issue could cause complete engine shutdown?" Marcus felt the familiar sensation of being in his element. The place where his years of experience with stubborn mechanical problems began to override his anxiety about working in unfamiliar social territory. It's possible. If the mounts are failing, the engine could be shifting just enough under load to stress connections that look fine when the boat is stationary. After 15 minutes of running, the heat expansion could make the problem worse until something disconnects completely. Mr. Davidson's expression suggested skepticism bordering on condescension. "Mr. Rivera, I think you should understand that this engine has been examined by certified marine engineers who would certainly have checked something as basic as motor mounts." But Victoria held up a hand, silencing her advisor's objection. "How long would it take you to check the mounts and determine whether that's the problem?" Marcus considered the question, thinking about the access issues on a yacht this size and the time it would take to properly inspect the mounting system. "Give me 2 hours to get the engine covers off and examine the mount points. If that's the problem, I can probably have it running properly by this afternoon." "And if it's not the problem," Victoria asked, "then you're no worse off than you were this morning, and you'll know for certain that the mounts aren't the issue." Victoria looked at her advisors, all of whom seemed to be communicating their disapproval through subtle facial expressions and meaningful glances. Marcus understood their position. They had already invested significant resources and expert opinions, and bringing in a relatively unknown mechanic from a modest repair shop probably looked like desperation rather than sound business judgment. "Miss Hartwell," Mr. Davidson said carefully, "perhaps we should consider the recommendation from Newport Marine Technologies. They specialize in high-end yacht repairs, and their estimate, while expensive, comes with guarantees and insurance coverage that would protect your investment." Victoria studied Marcus's face with the kind of attention that made him feel as if she were reading his resume in his expression. "Mr. Rivera, why do you think you can solve a problem that has stumped 3 other technicians?" The question was fair, but it required an answer that Marcus wasn't sure he could articulate without sounding either arrogant or pathetic. How could he explain that his success with impossible repairs came not from superior training or advanced equipment, but from the desperate persistence of someone who couldn't afford to give up when other people had the luxury of walking away from difficult problems? "Because I need to," he said finally, the honesty of the response surprising even himself. "Those other technicians have a dozen other jobs they can move on to when this one gets too complicated. I don't. For me, impossible repairs aren't a professional challenge. They're a necessity." Victoria's smile was the first genuine expression of warmth Marcus had seen from her since he'd arrived at Slip 47. "That's either the most honest thing I've heard from a mechanic in years, or the best sales pitch I've ever encountered." "It's probably both," Marcus admitted. "All right, Mr. Rivera. You have 2 hours to convince me that simple solutions can solve complex problems. If you're right, we'll discuss compensation that reflects the value of restoring an $8 million yacht to working condition. If you're wrong, I'll pay you for your time, and we'll all pretend this conversation never happened." As Marcus gathered his tools and prepared to descend into the engine compartment of the most expensive boat he'd ever touched, he found himself thinking about Miguel and the conversation they'd had on the Santa Monica Pier. His son had asked why he always tried to fix things that were already broken beyond repair, and at the time, Marcus hadn't had a good answer. Now, surrounded by the gleaming perfection of Victoria Hartwell's yacht, he began to understand that maybe fixing impossible things wasn't a character flaw or a waste of time. Maybe it was preparation for the moment when fixing something impossible could change everything. The engine compartment of the Serendipity was unlike anything Marcus had encountered in his years of marine repair work. Where most boat engines were crammed into spaces that seemed designed to make maintenance as difficult as possible, this compartment was spacious, well-lit, and organized with the precision of a surgical suite. Every component was easily accessible, every system was clearly labeled, and the level of engineering sophistication was immediately apparent to someone who had spent years working on engines that were held together with determination and prayer. The main engine was a work of art, a 12-cylinder diesel motor that probably produced enough power to propel the yacht at speeds that would make highway driving seem leisurely. Marcus had read about engines like this in trade magazines, but he had never expected to see one in person, let alone be responsible for diagnosing and repairing a problem that had confounded specialists who worked on such equipment regularly. As he began his examination, Marcus was struck by how clean and well-maintained everything appeared. This was not an engine that had been neglected or abused. Every component showed evidence of regular professional attention, and the overall condition suggested that money had never been a limiting factor in its care and feeding. If the engine mounts were indeed the problem, it would be a testament to how even the most expensive and sophisticated systems could be brought down by relatively simple failures. The first mount he examined looked perfect from above, its rubber cushioning intact, and its metal brackets showing no obvious signs of stress or fatigue. But when Marcus climbed underneath the engine and examined the mount from below, he immediately saw what the previous technicians had missed. The lower portion of the mount assembly, invisible unless someone actually crawled into the bilge and looked up at the system from underneath, showed clear evidence of separation between the rubber cushioning and the metal bracket. The failure was subtle, probably occurring gradually over months of normal operation, but it was significant enough to allow the engine to shift slightly under load. As the engine ran and heated up, the thermal expansion would make the shift more pronounced until electrical connections began to separate, or fuel lines became stressed enough to interrupt the flow of diesel to the injectors. Marcus spent another hour confirming his diagnosis, checking each of the 4 engine mounts and discovering that 3 of the 4 showed some degree of separation or deterioration. The problem had almost certainly been developing for months, but because it only manifested after the engine reached operating temperature and began to stress the mounting system, it would have been nearly impossible to detect during static inspections or short test runs. When he emerged from the engine compartment, Victoria was waiting on the deck with an expression that seemed to hover somewhere between hope and skepticism. The men in suits had apparently found other places to be, leaving Victoria alone with her thoughts and whatever phone calls were required to manage a business empire from the deck of a disabled yacht. "Well?" she asked, setting down her phone and giving Marcus her complete attention. Marcus wiped his hands on a shop rag, trying to organize his thoughts into an explanation that would make sense to someone who wasn't intimately familiar with diesel engine systems and mounting configurations. "The mounts are failing. All 4 of them show some degree of deterioration, and 3 are separated enough to allow the engine to shift under load." Victoria's expression didn't change immediately, as if she were processing the implications of his diagnosis and comparing it to the more complex explanations she'd received from the previous technicians. "Engine mounts," she said slowly. "Something that probably costs less than $1,000 to replace. For the parts, yes. The labor will be more expensive because we'll need to support the engine while we replace the mounts. And on a boat this size, that requires some specialized equipment. But we're talking about a repair bill in the low thousands rather than the hundreds of thousands." Victoria leaned against the yacht's railing, her gaze moving from Marcus to the engine compartment and back again. 3 different marine engineers looked at this engine. Men with decades of experience and advanced degrees in marine propulsion systems. How did they miss something so fundamental? Marcus had been wondering the same thing, and his best guess reflected something he'd learned during his years of working on engines that other people had given up on. They were looking for complex problems because simple problems don't usually defeat experienced technicians. When you're dealing with an $8 million yacht, the assumption is that any problem significant enough to require expert attention must be correspondingly sophisticated. And because they were looking for complex problems, they missed the simple one. Plus, the mount failure is only visible from underneath, and most diagnostic work is done from above or from the sides where access is easier. Unless someone specifically suspected mount problems and took the time to crawl into the bilge and examine the system from below, the failure would be nearly invisible. Victoria nodded slowly, her expression suggesting that she was reassessing not just the engine problem but the entire approach she'd been taking to its solution. How long to fix it? Marcus calculated the time required to order the correct replacement mounts, schedule the equipment rental needed to support the engine during the replacement process, and complete the installation work. If I can get the parts by tomorrow morning, I can have you running by tomorrow evening. If the parts take longer to arrive, then we're looking at early next week. And the cost? $3,000 for parts and labor, assuming I don't run into any complications during the installation. Victoria's laugh was genuine this time, carrying relief rather than frustration. Mr. Rivera, do you realize that you've just diagnosed and quoted a repair for less than what I paid the last technician just to look at the engine? Marcus felt a familiar mixture of pride and anxiety that came with moments when his skills were finally recognized and valued. He had learned not to celebrate too early, because experience had taught him that positive initial reactions didn't always translate into successful outcomes or satisfied customers. But Victoria's response suggested that maybe, just maybe, this would be one of the repairs that worked out exactly as planned. There's one more thing, Marcus said, feeling obligated to mention a potential complication that could affect both the timeline and the cost of the repair. When I replace the mounts, I'm going to want to inspect the engine alignment. If the mounts have been failing gradually, there's a chance that the engine has shifted enough to stress the transmission coupling or the propeller shaft. Those components are expensive to replace, and if they're damaged, the repair becomes much more complicated. Victoria's expression grew serious again. How much more complicated? Worst-case scenario, if the shaft is bent or the transmission is damaged, we could be looking at $20,000 or $30,000 in additional repairs. But that's still a fraction of what you were quoted for a complete engine rebuild. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a contact list, filled with names that probably represented more combined wealth and influence than Marcus would encounter in several lifetimes. Mr. Rivera, I'm going to make some calls and arrange for the parts to be delivered by tomorrow morning. I'm also going to arrange for whatever equipment you need to complete the repair safely and efficiently. Marcus felt his anxiety spike at the mention of equipment and resources that he hadn't requested and couldn't afford. Ms. Hartwell, I appreciate the offer, but I should mention that my rates are based on standard repair procedures using standard equipment. If you want to bring in specialized tools or crews, that's going to change the cost structure significantly. Victoria looked at him with an expression that suggested she found his concern both touching and naive. Mr. Rivera, if you can restore my yacht to working condition for $3,000, I'm not going to quibble about spending a few thousand more to ensure that you have everything you need to complete the job properly. The conversation was moving into territory that made Marcus uncomfortable, not because Victoria was being unreasonable, but because her casual attitude toward money highlighted the vast difference between their respective circumstances. $3,000 represented a significant windfall for Marcus, potentially enough to catch up on overdue bills and maybe even visit Miguel in Phoenix. For Victoria, $3,000 appeared to be a rounding error, an amount so insignificant that she was willing to spend additional thousands just to ensure the repair was completed efficiently. I'll need a deposit, Marcus said, the words emerging before he could consider whether asking for money up front might seem presumptuous or unprofessional. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook that looked like it had never been used for anything as mundane as paying household bills. How much? Marcus tried to calculate a reasonable deposit that would cover his parts costs without seeming excessive. $1,500 should cover the parts and equipment rental. Victoria wrote a check and handed it to him. Marcus glanced at the amount and felt his stomach lurch. She had written the check for $5,000. Ms. Hartwell, this is more than we discussed for the entire repair. Mr. Rivera, consider it an incentive to complete the repair as quickly as possible. I have a business meeting in San Francisco on Sunday that requires me to be on this yacht, and if you can make that happen, the extra money is a small price to pay for avoiding the complications of rescheduling. Marcus folded the check carefully and slipped it into his wallet, trying not to think about how drastically this single repair job would improve his financial situation. $5,000 would not only cover his immediate expenses but would allow him to visit Miguel next weekend and maybe even discuss with Carmen the possibility of increasing his visitation schedule. "There's one more thing I should mention," Victoria said as Marcus prepared to leave the yacht and begin arranging for parts and equipment. "If this repair works out the way you've described, I'm going to need to have a longer conversation with you about a more permanent arrangement." Marcus paused at the top of the gangway, uncertain whether he had heard correctly or understood the implications of what Victoria was suggesting. "What kind of permanent arrangement?" Victoria's smile carried the confidence of someone who was accustomed to making offers that people found difficult to refuse. "The kind that would solve your financial problems and give you the opportunity to work on engines that actually deserve your skills, rather than spending your talents on equipment that should have been scrapped years ago." As Marcus walked back towards Sal's marine repair shop, Victoria's check in his wallet and her offer echoing in his mind, he found himself wondering whether fixing one impossible repair had somehow opened a door to possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. The fog was beginning to lift from the marina, and for the first time in months, the expensive yachts and their slips looked less like reminders of what he couldn't afford, and more like examples of what might be achievable for someone who specialized in making the impossible possible. That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment above the repair shop, surrounded by parts catalogs and supplier websites, as he researched the specific engine mounts required for Victoria's yacht. The precision required for the repair was unlike anything he typically encountered. Each mount had to match exact specifications for weight capacity, vibration dampening, and dimensional tolerances that left no room for improvisation or substitution. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Victoria about permanent arrangements and opportunities to work on equipment that deserved his skills. The offer was intriguing, but it also represented a level of professional advancement that seemed to exist in a different universe from his current circumstances. People like Victoria Hartwell didn't typically hire mechanics like Marcus Rivera for positions that involved long-term financial security and career advancement, but the check in his wallet was real, and her engine was genuinely broken in exactly the way he diagnosed. If he could complete the repair successfully and restore her yacht to working condition in time for her San Francisco meeting, then maybe her offer of a permanent arrangement would prove to be as real as everything else about their interaction. Marcus's phone rang at 9:30, interrupting his research and his speculation about futures that might or might not materialize. The caller ID showed Miguel's number, and Marcus felt the familiar mixture of joy and anxiety that came with unexpected calls from his son. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice light despite the emotional weight that any conversation with Miguel carried. "What's going on?" "Dad, Mom said I could call you because I had a question about something for my science project." Marcus felt his heart lift at the idea that Miguel might want his advice about something academic, something that would allow him to be helpful rather than simply another disappointment in his son's life. "What kind of science project?" "We're supposed to choose a simple machine and explain how it works and why it's important. I was thinking about choosing an engine, but I wanted to make sure I understood how they actually work before I started writing about them." Marcus settled back in his chair, feeling more comfortable and competent than he had in any conversation with Miguel in recent memory. Engines were something he understood completely, and explaining their operation to a 12-year-old was exactly the kind of challenge that played to his strengths rather than highlighting his failures. They spent the next hour discussing internal combustion engines, diesel versus gasoline systems, and the principles of converting fuel into mechanical motion. Miguel asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested in the answers, and for the first time in months, Marcus felt like he was contributing something valuable to his son's education and development. "Dad," Miguel said as their conversation began to wind down, "Mom said you've been doing really well lately. She said you're working on some important repair jobs and that you seem happier when we talk on the phone." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion at the idea that Carmen had noticed positive changes in his attitude and had shared those observations with Miguel. "I'm trying to be better, buddy. I'm trying to be the kind of dad you deserve to have." "You're already a good dad," Miguel said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children can deliver. "You just need to believe that about yourself." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the quiet of his apartment, thinking about Miguel's words and about the repair job that could potentially change the trajectory of his life. Tomorrow, he would begin the most important work he'd done in years. Not just because of the financial implications, but because success or failure would determine whether Victoria's offer of a permanent arrangement was genuine or simply the polite fiction of someone who felt obligated to be encouraging. The engine mounts arrived at 6:30 the next morning, delivered by a courier service that Marcus had never heard of, but that apparently specialized in same-day delivery of precision marine parts. The mounts themselves were impressive examples of engineering, designed to support massive weight while dampening vibrations and allowing for thermal expansion and contraction. Each mount cost more than Marcus typically spent on parts for an entire repair job, but they represented the kind of quality that made $8 million yachts possible. Victoria arrived at the marina an hour later, carrying coffee and what appeared to be breakfast for both of them. She found Marcus in the engine compartment, already beginning the process of supporting the engine and removing the first of the failed mounts. "How's it looking?" she asked, handing him a cup of coffee that was significantly better than anything he typically drank. Marcus emerged from the engine compartment and accepted the coffee gratefully. "The mounts are exactly as bad as I expected them to be. The surprising thing is that the engine ran at all with this much deterioration in the mounting system." Victoria nodded, her expression serious as she processed the implications of his assessment. "And the alignment? Any signs of damage to the transmission or propeller shaft?" Marcus had spent considerable time examining those components, knowing that unexpected damage could transform a simple repair into a major reconstruction project. "Everything looks good. The engine shifted, but not enough to cause permanent damage to the connected systems. We got lucky." "We got lucky, or you diagnosed the problem before it could cause more expensive damage." Marcus considered her question, recognizing that she was asking him to take credit for professional competence rather than attributing positive outcomes to random chance. "I guess we'll find out when I fire up the engine this afternoon." Victoria settled into a deck chair where she could observe the repair process without interfering with Marcus's work. "Mr. Rivera, while you're working, I'd like to discuss the permanent arrangement I mentioned yesterday." Marcus paused in his work, uncertain whether he should continue with the repair or give Victoria his complete attention for what sounded like an important conversation. "I'm listening." Victoria pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be a document that had been prepared specifically for their discussion. "I own 7 yachts, ranging in size from 60 feet to 140 feet. Maintaining those vessels currently costs me approximately $300,000 per year in service contracts, parts, and repairs." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise involuntarily at the mention of maintenance costs that exceeded his total income for the past several years. "That's a significant investment in marine maintenance." Victoria's smile suggested that she found his understated response amusing. "Mr. Rivera, $300,000 is what I currently spend on marine maintenance that often fails to solve problems efficiently or cost-effectively. Yesterday, 3 different technicians quoted me $800,000 to rebuild an engine that you diagnosed and repaired for $3,000. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the direction of Victoria's proposal but not yet grasping the full implications of what she might be suggesting. "What I'm proposing," Victoria continued, "is a position as my chief marine engineer, responsible for the maintenance and repair of my entire fleet. The position would come with a salary of $150,000 per year, plus benefits, plus a bonus structure based on cost savings compared to my current maintenance expenses." Marcus stopped working entirely, his wrench suspended in mid-air, as he processed what Victoria had just offered him. $150,000 was more than he had made in the previous 3 years combined, and the idea that someone would pay him that amount to do work he loved seemed to exist in the realm of fantasy rather than reality. "Ms. Hartwell, I think there might be some misunderstanding about my qualifications. I don't have engineering degrees or certifications in yacht maintenance. I'm just a mechanic who's gotten good at fixing things that other people give up on." Victoria's expression grew more serious, as if she were about to deliver information that would require his complete attention. "Mr. Rivera, I didn't build a $2 billion company by making hiring decisions based on credentials or conventional qualifications. I built it by identifying people who could solve problems that others couldn't solve, and then providing them with the resources and authority they needed to be successful." Marcus felt his world shifting in ways that he couldn't fully comprehend. The conversation had moved far beyond engine repairs, and into territory that seemed to belong to other people's lives, people who didn't live in small apartments above repair shops and worry about making child support payments on time. "What would be expected of me in this position?" he asked, trying to ground the discussion in practical details that he could evaluate rationally. Victoria consulted her tablet again, apparently reading from a job description that had been prepared with the same attention to detail that characterized everything else about her approach to business. "You would be responsible for developing maintenance schedules for all 7 vessels, overseeing repairs and upgrades, managing relationships with suppliers and service providers, and ensuring that my yachts are always available when needed for business or personal use." Marcus considered the scope of responsibility she was describing, trying to imagine himself managing the maintenance of a fleet worth tens of millions of dollars. "And if I make mistakes? If I misdiagnose a problem or approve repairs that don't work?" Victoria's smile was reassuring rather than dismissive. "Mr. Rivera, mistakes are part of learning, and learning is part of getting better. What I'm offering you is not a position where perfection is expected, but a position where problem-solving and continuous improvement are valued above conventional approaches that produce conventional results." As Marcus returned to his work on the engine mounts, Victoria's offer echoing in his mind like a song he couldn't stop humming, he found himself thinking about Miguel's science project and the conversation they'd had about engines and how they worked. Maybe his son was right that he was already a good mechanic who just needed to believe in himself. And maybe Victoria Hartwell was right that unconventional qualifications could lead to extraordinary opportunities for people who were willing to take risks on their own abilities. The repair proceeded exactly as Marcus had predicted. The old mounts came off easily once the engine was properly supported, and the new mounts installed with the precision that quality parts made possible. By late afternoon, he was ready to test the engine and determine whether his diagnosis had been correct, or whether Victoria's yacht would continue to confound the marine repair industry. Victoria stood beside him as he prepared to start the engine, her expression carrying the kind of anticipation that comes with moments when significant amounts of money and professional reputation hang in the balance. "Ready?" Marcus asked, his hand hovering over the ignition switch. "I've been ready since yesterday morning," Victoria replied. The engine started immediately, settling into the smooth, powerful idle that 12 cylinders of precision engineering could produce when everything was working correctly. Marcus monitored the gauges and listened to the engine's sound as it warmed up, waiting for the 15-minute mark when the previous problems had consistently manifested. 15 minutes passed with no interruption in the engine's performance. Then 20 minutes. Then 30. The engine ran smoothly and consistently, showing no signs of the mysterious shutdowns that had puzzled 3 different technicians and threatened to cost Victoria hundreds of thousands of dollars in unnecessary repairs. "Mr. Rivera," Victoria said as they watched the engine continue to run flawlessly past the 45-minute mark, "I think we can consider this repair a complete success." Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction that came with solving problems that other people had declared unsolvable, but this time the satisfaction was amplified by the knowledge that success had opened doors to possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. "It looks like the mounts were exactly the problem we thought they were." Victoria turned off the engine and extended her hand to Marcus with the formality of someone sealing an agreement that would change both their lives. "Mr. Rivera, if you're willing to accept my offer, I'd like to discuss the details of your new position over dinner tonight. There are some aspects of the job that are better explained in person, and some resources I'd like to show you that will help you understand the scope of what we're building together." Marcus wiped his hands on his shop rag before accepting Victoria's handshake, still struggling to process the speed with which his circumstances had transformed from financial desperation to professional opportunity. "Ms. Hartwell, I appreciate the offer more than you can know, but I need to ask about timing. When would you want me to start, and what would that mean for my current obligations?" Victoria's expression suggested that she had anticipated his concern about transitioning from his current position to the opportunity she was offering. "I understand that you have responsibilities to your current employer and probably can't simply walk away from your job without notice. What I'm proposing is a gradual transition over the next month, during which you would continue your current work while beginning to familiarize yourself with my fleet and developing maintenance protocols for each vessel." The practical approach she was suggesting made Marcus feel more comfortable about the dramatic change she was proposing. Abandoning Sal in the repair shop without proper notice would have felt like betraying the man who had given him steady work during his recovery from alcoholism, even if that work was poorly paid and offered limited opportunities for advancement. "What about training?" Marcus asked. First, no marine engines, but managing a fleet of luxury yachts probably requires knowledge and skills that I don't currently possess. Victoria consulted her tablet again, apparently referring to notes she had made about the resources and support that would be available to Marcus in his new role. Part of your compensation package includes education and certification programs. I've already identified 3 marine engineering courses that would enhance your technical knowledge, and there's a yacht management program in Newport that would give you the business skills needed to oversee vendors and coordinate major maintenance projects. Marcus felt his anxiety about accepting responsibilities beyond his current qualifications beginning to ease, as Victoria outlined the support system she had already planned for his professional development. Her approach suggested that she was genuinely invested in his success rather than simply hoping that enthusiasm could substitute for expertise. "Ms. Hartwell, can I ask why you're making this offer to me? You don't know anything about my background, my work history, or my reliability. For all you know, I could be completely irresponsible or incompetent outside of this one successful repair." Victoria's laugh was genuine, carrying the warmth of someone who found his honesty refreshing rather than concerning. "Mr. Rivera, I've been building businesses for 15 years, and I've learned that the most important qualification for any position is the ability to solve problems that other people can't solve. Yesterday, you diagnosed and repaired an engine problem that defeated 3 specialists with advanced degrees and decades of experience. That tells me more about your capabilities than any resume or reference letter could." Marcus nodded, beginning to understand that Victoria's approach to hiring was based on demonstrated results rather than conventional credentials. "And you're confident that success with one repair job translates into the ability to manage an entire fleet?" Victoria stood up and walked to the railing of her yacht, gazing out at the marina where dozens of expensive vessels represented millions of dollars in marine engineering and craftsmanship. "Mr. Rivera, every one of these boats was built by people who started with basic skills and developed expertise through experience and education. What I'm offering you is the opportunity to develop those same skills while working on equipment that represents the absolute pinnacle of marine engineering." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man in his 50s who approached the yacht with the confident stride of someone who belonged in the marina's premium section. He was well-dressed without being ostentatious, and his demeanor suggested both authority and familiarity with Victoria's business operations. "Victoria, I heard you found someone who could fix the engine problem," the man said as he boarded the yacht and approached their position near the stern. "I have to admit, I was skeptical when you told me you were going to try a different approach." Victoria gestured for Marcus to join their conversation. "James, I'd like you to meet Marcus Rivera, the mechanic who solved our mysterious engine failure. Marcus, this is James Patterson, my business partner and the person who will be working with you to coordinate maintenance schedules for the entire fleet." James extended his hand to Marcus with the professional courtesy of someone who was accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. "Mr. Rivera, Victoria tells me you diagnosed a mount failure that 3 other technicians missed completely. That's either impressive detective work or remarkable luck." Marcus felt the familiar pressure of being evaluated by people whose judgment could significantly impact his future opportunities. "Probably a combination of both, sir. I've learned that sometimes the simplest explanations are the ones that get overlooked when everyone's expecting complicated problems." James nodded approvingly, his expression suggesting that Marcus's answer had met some unspoken standard for practical wisdom. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need for this fleet. Too many service providers assume that expensive equipment requires expensive solutions, and that assumption costs us money and downtime that we can't afford." Victoria consulted her watch, apparently mindful of other commitments that required her attention. "Marcus, if you're willing to accept our offer, I'd like to arrange for you to visit our other vessels this weekend. That will give you a chance to assess their current condition and begin developing maintenance priorities for each boat." Marcus felt his excitement building at the prospect of examining a fleet of luxury yachts and applying his diagnostic skills to equipment that represented the highest levels of marine engineering. "I'd be very interested in that opportunity." James pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a calendar filled with appointments and commitments. "I can arrange for you to have access to all 7 boats on Saturday morning. That should give you enough time to complete initial assessments and identify any immediate maintenance needs. What should I be looking for during these assessments?" Marcus asked, wanting to ensure that he focused his attention on the most important aspects of each vessel's condition. Victoria and James exchanged glances, apparently communicating about priorities and expectations through the kind of nonverbal understanding that develops between long-term business partners. "Focus on engine systems first," Victoria said. "Those are the most critical for operational reliability, and they're also the most expensive to repair when problems are allowed to develop." James added, "After engines, we're most concerned about electrical systems and navigation equipment. These boats are used for business meetings and client entertainment, so communication and positioning systems are essential for both safety and professional image." Marcus nodded, mentally organizing his approach to evaluating 7 different vessels in a single day. The task would require efficiency and attention to detail, but it would also provide him with comprehensive exposure to the range of equipment and systems he would be responsible for maintaining. "One more thing," Victoria said as they prepared to conclude their discussion. "I want you to document everything you find during your assessments. Not just problems or maintenance needs, but also examples of good practices or superior equipment that we should consider implementing across the fleet." The emphasis on documentation and best practices suggested that Victoria was thinking about fleet management as a systematic process rather than a collection of individual repair jobs. Marcus appreciated her approach because it aligned with his own preference for understanding how systems work together rather than simply fixing isolated problems as they arose. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment above the repair shop, trying to process the magnitude of the opportunity that Victoria had offered him. The salary she had proposed would transform his financial situation completely, allowing him to pay off his debts, increase his child support payments, and potentially relocate closer to Miguel if Carmen's job transfer to Seattle materialized. But beyond the financial implications, the position represented a level of professional respect and responsibility that Marcus had never imagined achieving. The idea that someone would trust him with the maintenance of vessels worth tens of millions of dollars seemed to exist in a different universe from his experience with rusty outboard motors and neglected fishing boats. His phone rang at 8:30. Interrupting his contemplation of futures that might or might not become reality. The caller ID showed Carmen's number, and Marcus felt the familiar anxiety that accompanied unexpected calls from his ex-wife. "Marcus, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," Carmen said, her voice carrying none of the tension that had characterized their interactions during the worst periods of their marriage and divorce. "Miguel told me about your conversation yesterday, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to help him with his science project." Marcus felt a rush of gratitude toward Miguel for sharing positive aspects of their conversation with his mother. "He's working on a really interesting project. I enjoyed talking with him about engines and how they work." Carmen's tone grew more serious, suggesting that she had called to discuss something more significant than Miguel's homework. "Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation last month regarding the custody arrangement. You mentioned that your work situation might be changing in ways that would allow you to spend more time with Miguel." Marcus's heart rate accelerated as he realized that Carmen might be willing to discuss modifications to their custody agreement that would give him more meaningful time with his son. "My work situation is changing, but I wasn't sure whether those changes would be significant enough to warrant revisiting our arrangement." "What kind of changes are we talking about?" Carmen asked, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to be cautious about raising hopes that might not be fulfilled. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of having genuinely positive news to share about his professional prospects. "I've been offered a position managing marine maintenance for a fleet of luxury yachts. The salary would be significant enough to allow me to relocate closer to Miguel, and the work schedule would be more predictable than my current situation." Carmen was quiet for several moments, apparently processing the implications of what Marcus had told her. "That sounds like a substantial improvement from your current job. When would this position start?" "Assuming I accept the offer, I would begin transitioning over the next month and be fully established in the new role by the end of November." Carmen's response carried cautious optimism rather than the skepticism that Marcus had learned to expect when discussing his plans or prospects. "Marcus, if this opportunity is genuine and sustainable, I think we should discuss modifications to the custody arrangement that would give you more regular time with Miguel." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion at the prospect of being a more consistent presence in his son's life. "What kind of modifications are you thinking about?" "Instead of every other weekend, What if Miguel spent 1 week per month with you? That would give you enough time to establish real routines and share more meaningful experiences than what's possible during short weekend visits. The proposal exceeded Marcus's most optimistic hopes for increased custody time. 1 week per month would allow him to be involved in Miguel's daily life, to help with homework on a regular basis, and to build the kind of ongoing relationship that had been impossible under their current arrangement. Carmen, that would mean everything to me. Miguel is the most important part of my life, and having more time with him would make any career change worthwhile. Carmen's voice carried the warmth that Marcus remembered from the early years of their marriage, before alcohol and financial stress had poisoned their relationship. I know how much you love Miguel, and I know how hard you've worked to get your life back on track. If this job opportunity allows you to provide stability and consistency, then I think more custody time would be good for both of you. After their conversation ended, Marcus sat in the quiet of his apartment, contemplating the convergence of opportunities that seemed too good to be true. A career change that would transform his financial situation, increased time with his son, and professional recognition for skills that he had developed through years of persistence and dedication to solving impossible problems. The next morning brought confirmation that some opportunities were indeed too good to be true, at least initially. Marcus arrived at the marina to find Victoria's yacht surrounded by police cars and crime scene tape, with Detective Sarah Martinez coordinating what appeared to be a significant investigation. "Mr. Rivera," Detective Martinez called out as Marcus approached the perimeter that had been established around Slip 47. "I understand you performed repair work on this vessel yesterday. I need to ask you some questions about your interactions with the owner and anyone else who might have been aboard." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that something serious had happened to Victoria or her yacht during the night. "What's wrong? Is Ms. Hartwell okay?" Detective Martinez consulted a notebook that contained information Marcus couldn't read from his position outside the crime scene perimeter. "Ms. Hartwell is fine, but there was an incident aboard her yacht last night that requires us to treat the vessel as a crime scene until we complete our investigation." Marcus tried to process what the detective was telling him while simultaneously worrying about how a criminal investigation might affect Victoria's offer of employment. What kind of incident? Detective Martinez studied Marcus's expression with the careful attention of someone trained to detect deception or concealment. Someone broke into the yacht around midnight and attempted to access the engine compartment. The intruder was interrupted by security guards and fled before anything was stolen, but we're treating this as attempted theft of marine equipment. Marcus felt relief that Victoria was unharmed, but confusion about why anyone would attempt to steal components from an engine that had just been repaired. "Detective, the engine parts one installed yesterday aren't particularly valuable as resale items. Engine mounts are specific to individual boat models, so they wouldn't be useful for most other vessels." Detective Martinez made notes in her notebook, apparently finding Marcus's assessment of the theft attempt significant. "That's an interesting point, Mr. Rivera. If the intruder wasn't after valuable parts, what do you think they might have been looking for?" Marcus considered the question, trying to imagine what someone might hope to find in the engine compartment of Victoria's yacht that would justify the risk of breaking into a boat in a well-secured marina. "I honestly can't think of anything. The engine compartment contains mechanical systems and electrical components, but nothing that would be valuable enough to warrant breaking into a boat." Detective Martinez closed her notebook and handed Marcus a business card. "Mr. Rivera, if you think of anything that might help us understand this incident, please contact me immediately. In the meantime, the yacht will remain secured as a crime scene for at least another 24 hours. As Marcus walked back toward Sal's repair shop, he found himself wondering whether the attempted break-in was somehow connected to his repair work or whether it was simply an unfortunate coincidence that threatened to complicate Victoria's offer of employment. The timing seemed suspicious, but he couldn't imagine any connection between installing new engine mounts and criminal activity. His speculation was interrupted by the arrival of Victoria herself, who appeared in the marina parking lot driving a luxury sedan that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 years. She approached him with the determined stride of someone who refused to allow setbacks to derail important plans. "Marcus," she said as she reached his position near the repair shop, "I assume you've heard about last night's excitement aboard my yacht." Marcus nodded, still trying to understand the implications of the break-in for their professional relationship. Detective Martinez said someone tried to break into the engine compartment. I can't imagine what they might have been looking for. Victoria's expression grew serious, suggesting that she had information about the incident that hadn't been shared with Marcus. The break-in wasn't random, and it wasn't about stealing engine parts. Someone was looking for something specific, and they believed it might be hidden in the engine compartment. Marcus felt his confusion deepening as Victoria revealed that the attempted theft was more complex than a simple case of marine equipment being targeted by opportunistic criminals. What kind of something? Victoria glanced around the marina parking lot, apparently ensuring that their conversation couldn't be overheard by other people in the area. Marcus, there are aspects of my business operations that I haven't discussed with you, partly because they weren't relevant to your engine repair work, and partly because they require a level of trust that we haven't yet established. Marcus sensed that Victoria was about to share information that would significantly complicate his understanding of both the break-in and the job opportunity she had offered him. What aspects of your business? Victoria gestured toward a bench near the marina office where they could continue their conversation with more privacy. My primary business involves international consulting for companies that operate in politically sensitive regions. Some of my clients require transportation and meeting venues that provide both luxury and security, which is why I maintain a fleet of yachts, rather than relying on commercial facilities. Marcus was beginning to understand that Victoria's yacht wasn't simply a recreational vessel, but a platform for conducting business that required discretion and mobility. And someone thinks you might be hiding something related to that business in your engine compartment? Victoria nodded grimly. 3 months ago, one of my clients provided me with information that could be extremely damaging to certain individuals if it became public. That information is stored in a secure location, but apparently someone believes it might be hidden aboard one of my yachts. Marcus felt the job opportunity that had seemed too good to be true becoming significantly more complicated as Victoria revealed the potential dangers associated with her business operations. Miss Hartwell, are you telling me that accepting your job offer would put me in contact with people who break into boats looking for sensitive information? Victoria's expression carried the seriousness of someone who understood that Marcus had every right to be concerned about the risks associated with working for her. Marcus, I won't lie to you about the potential complications. My business sometimes attracts attention from people who prefer to operate outside legal boundaries. But I also want you to understand that those risks are managed through professional security measures and careful operational protocols. Marcus tried to evaluate the trade-offs between the extraordinary career opportunity Victoria was offering and the potential dangers she was acknowledging. The salary and benefits she had proposed would transform his life and his relationship with Miguel, but they would also expose him to risks that went far beyond the normal challenges of marine maintenance work. What kind of security measures and operational protocols? He asked, wanting to understand how Victoria protected her employees from the risks associated with her consulting business. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a contact list filled with names and numbers that probably represented resources Marcus had never encountered. All of my yachts are equipped with sophisticated security systems, including surveillance equipment and communication devices that provide direct contact with professional security teams. My employees receive training in threat recognition and emergency procedures, and there are protocols for handling situations that might pose personal safety risks. Marcus considered Victoria's explanation, recognizing that she was offering him more comprehensive information about the risks and protections associated with working for her than most employers would provide. And if I decide that the risks outweigh the benefits? Victoria's smile was understanding rather than disappointed. Then you continue working for Sal, and we find someone else to manage my fleet maintenance. Marcus, I'm not going to pressure you into accepting a position that makes you uncomfortable, but I also want you to understand that the rewards are proportional to the challenges. Marcus spent the rest of the morning thinking about Victoria's offer, while working on a routine outboard motor repair that seemed almost absurdly simple compared to the complexities of yacht fleet management and international consulting. The contrast between his current work and the opportunity Victoria was presenting highlighted just how dramatically his life could change if he was willing to accept the risks associated with her business operations. At noon, his contemplation was interrupted by a phone call from James Patterson, Victoria's business partner, who apparently wanted to discuss the job offer from a different perspective than Victoria had provided. Mr. Rivera, Victoria told me about your conversation this morning regarding the security aspects of our operations. I wanted to speak with you directly about those concerns, because I think you deserve a complete understanding of what we're asking you to take on. Marcus appreciated James's willingness to address his concerns directly, rather than allowing uncertainty to influence his decision. I'm listening. James's voice carried the authority of someone who had extensive experience managing complex business operations in challenging environments. Mr. Rivera, our consulting work does occasionally attract attention from individuals who prefer to operate outside legal boundaries. However, in 15 years of business, we have never had an employee injured or seriously threatened because of our security protocols and operational procedures. Marcus found James's emphasis on safety record reassuring, but he also understood that past performance didn't guarantee future safety. What happened last night? Was that typical of the kind of attention your business attracts? James was quiet for a moment, apparently considering how much detail to provide about the specific incident. Last night's break-in was unusual in its boldness, but not unprecedented in terms of the kind of interest our operations sometimes generate. Someone wanted to search our yacht for information they believed might be stored there, and they were willing to risk criminal charges to conduct that search. Marcus tried to imagine himself working in an environment where break-ins and security threats were considered occupational hazards rather than extraordinary events. And you're confident that your security measures are adequate to protect employees who might be working aboard the yachts when incidents like this occur. James's response carried the conviction of someone who had invested significant resources in protecting his business operations and employees. Mr. Rivera, we employ the same security consultants who protect Fortune 500 executives and international diplomats. Our safety protocols are based on proven methods for operating in high-risk environments, and our insurance coverage reflects the comprehensive nature of our protection systems. The conversation with James provided Marcus with additional perspective on the risks and protections associated with Victoria's job offer, but it also emphasized that accepting the position would require him to operate in a professional environment unlike anything he had previously experienced. That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Victoria and arranged to meet her for dinner to discuss the terms and conditions of his employment in detail. The opportunity she was offering represented everything he had hoped to achieve professionally, and the additional custody time with Miguel that Carmen had proposed made the financial benefits even more meaningful. Victoria, he said when they met that evening at a restaurant overlooking the marina, I want to accept your offer, but I need to establish some ground rules that will allow me to do the job effectively while maintaining my personal safety and my relationship with my son. Victoria's expression indicated both satisfaction that he was accepting the position and curiosity about the conditions he wanted to establish. What kind of ground rules? Marcus had spent considerable time thinking about how to balance the extraordinary opportunity Victoria was offering with his responsibilities as a father and his need to maintain personal safety. First, I want comprehensive information about any security situations that might affect the yachts I'm working on. I can't do my job effectively if I'm constantly wondering whether I'm walking into a dangerous situation. Victoria nodded approvingly. That's completely reasonable. James and I will provide you with security briefings before you work on any vessel that might be subject to unusual risks. Marcus continued with his second condition. I want to limit my work schedule to allow for regular custody time with my son. The increased income you're offering will allow me to spend more time with Miguel, but only if the job doesn't require me to be available every weekend. Victoria consulted her tablet, apparently reviewing scheduling requirements and operational constraints. Most maintenance work can be scheduled during weekdays, and emergency repairs are handled by on-call teams rather than primary maintenance staff. I don't anticipate any conflicts with your custody schedule. Marcus felt his confidence building as Victoria demonstrated flexibility regarding his concerns and conditions. Finally, I want a trial period of 6 months, during which either of us can terminate the arrangement if it's not working out as expected. Victoria extended her hand across the dinner table, offering to shake on an agreement that would transform Marcus's professional and personal life. Mr. Rivera, I think we have the foundation for a very successful working relationship. As Marcus shook Victoria's hand and officially accepted the position that would change everything about his circumstances and prospects, he found himself thinking about Miguel's science project and the conversation they'd had about engines and how they worked. Maybe his son was right, that he was already capable of more than he believed. And maybe Victoria Hartwell was right that unconventional qualifications could lead to extraordinary opportunities for people who were willing to take calculated risks on their own abilities. The next morning brought the first concrete steps toward his new career, as Marcus accompanied James Patterson on a tour of the yacht fleet that he would soon be responsible for maintaining. The 7 vessels represented a floating showcase of marine engineering excellence, each one designed for specific purposes and equipped with systems that pushed the boundaries of what was possible on the water. The smallest yacht in the fleet was a 60-foot motor yacht named Meridian that served as Victoria's personal transportation for shorter trips along the California coast. Despite being the most modest vessel in the collection, it was equipped with twin diesel engines, sophisticated navigation systems, and communication equipment that would allow Victoria to conduct business while traveling between ports. "This is where you'll start," James explained as they examined the Meridian's engine compartment. "The systems are complex enough to provide good learning opportunities, but not so critical that mistakes would cause major disruptions to our operations." Marcus appreciated the graduated approach James was suggesting, recognizing that building expertise with the fleet would require time and experience with each vessel's unique characteristics and requirements. "What kind of maintenance schedule does this boat follow?" James consulted a tablet that contained detailed records for each yacht in the fleet. "Currently, we have the Meridian serviced every 6 months by Newport Marine Technologies. The annual cost is approximately $35,000, which includes routine maintenance, system inspections, and minor repairs." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise at the mention of maintenance costs that exceeded his previous annual salary. "And you think I can provide the same level of service more cost-effectively?" James's smile carried the confidence of someone who had already calculated the potential savings Marcus could provide. "Mr. Rivera, Newport Marine charges us $400 per hour for routine maintenance work. You diagnosed and repaired a problem on Victoria's yacht that they quoted at $800,000. I'm confident that you can provide superior service at a fraction of their cost." As they moved from the Meridian to progressively larger and more sophisticated vessels in the fleet, Marcus began to understand the scope of responsibility he was accepting. The largest yacht, a 140-foot vessel named Sanctuary, was essentially a floating office building equipped with conference rooms, communication centers, and accommodations for up to 20 guests. "This is where Victoria conducts her most sensitive business meetings," James explained as they toured the Sanctuary's multiple levels and specialized compartments. "The vessel is designed to operate independently for extended periods, which requires redundant systems for power, water, communication, and navigation." Marcus examined the engine room of the Sanctuary with the focused attention of someone trying to understand systems that were far more complex than anything he had previously encountered. The vessel was powered by 4 diesel engines, each one larger and more sophisticated than the single engine he had repaired on Victoria's Serendipity. "What happens if one of these engines fails while the boat is being used for a business meeting?" Marcus asked, trying to understand the operational implications of mechanical problems on a vessel this critical to Victoria's business operations. James's expression grew serious as he considered the potential consequences of mechanical failures during important business operations. "Mechanical problems during client meetings could cost us millions of dollars in lost business opportunities and damaged professional relationships. That's why reliability is more important than cost savings when it comes to maintaining this particular vessel." Marcus nodded, understanding that his new position would require him to balance cost-effectiveness with operational reliability in ways that went far beyond simple mechanical competence. The consequences of mistakes or oversights could extend well beyond repair costs to include business relationships and professional reputations that were worth far more than any individual yacht. By the end of the day, Marcus had examined all 7 vessels in Victoria's fleet and begun to develop maintenance priorities based on each boat's condition, usage patterns, and criticality to business operations. The scope of work was daunting, but it was also exciting in ways that his previous job had never provided. That evening, Marcus called Miguel to share the news about his new career opportunity and the increased custody time that would result from his improved financial situation. "Dad, that sounds amazing," Miguel said with genuine enthusiasm. "Does this mean you'll be able to visit me more often, and maybe I can come stay with you during school vacations?" Marcus felt his heart swell with happiness at his son's positive response to the news. "It means all of that and more, buddy. If everything works out the way we're planning, you'll be able to spend 1 week every month with me, and we'll have time to do all the things we've talked about but never had enough time for." Miguel's excitement was infectious, reminding Marcus why the financial and professional benefits of Victoria's job offer were secondary to the opportunity to be a more consistent presence in his son's life. "Can I help you with your work sometimes? I'd love to learn more about yacht engines and how they're different from regular boat engines." Marcus smiled at the idea of sharing his new career with Miguel, imagining the conversations they could have about marine engineering and the satisfaction of working on equipment that represented the pinnacle of mechanical craftsmanship. "I think that can be arranged, as long as your mom is okay with you spending time around boats and engines." After their conversation ended, Marcus sat in his apartment above the repair shop, looking around at the modest space that had been his home during the most difficult period of his adult life. In a few weeks, he would be moving to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, closer to the marina where Victoria's fleet was moored. The change would represent more than just improved living conditions. It would mark his transition from surviving to thriving, from fixing other people's problems to building something meaningful for himself and his son. The next morning brought Marcus's first official day as Victoria's chief marine engineer, beginning with a comprehensive security briefing that James had arranged to ensure Marcus understood the protocols and procedures that would keep him safe while working on the fleet. The briefing was conducted by Sarah Chen, a security consultant who had previously worked for the State Department and who now provided protection services for high-profile business executives and their operations. Sarah was a woman in her 40s with the kind of quiet competence that suggested extensive experience managing complex security challenges. "Mr. Rivera," Sarah began as they settled into chairs in Victoria's office, "my job is to ensure that you can perform your maintenance work without worrying about personal safety or security threats. To do that effectively, I need you to understand the nature of the risks we're managing and the procedures we use to mitigate those risks." Marcus appreciated Sarah's direct approach to discussing security concerns, preferring straightforward information to vague reassurances that wouldn't help him make informed decisions about his safety. "What kind of risks are we talking about?" Sarah consulted a tablet that contained information Marcus couldn't read from his position across the table. Victoria's consulting business involves providing strategic advice to international companies that operate in politically sensitive regions. Some of her clients have competitors or adversaries who would benefit from accessing confidential information about business strategies or operational plans. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand that Victoria's yachts were potential targets not because of their value as vessels, but because of the sensitive information that might be discussed or stored aboard them during business meetings. "And you think someone might try to plant surveillance equipment or search the boats for documents?" Sarah's expression indicated that Marcus had correctly assessed the primary security threats facing Victoria's operations. "Those are the most likely scenarios, yes. The break-in we experienced earlier this week was probably an attempt to install listening devices or search for documents that someone believed might be stored aboard the yacht." Marcus considered the implications of working in an environment where his routine maintenance activities might inadvertently interfere with surveillance devices or security measures that he couldn't see or detect. "How do I perform my job without accidentally compromising security systems or missing signs of tampering?" Sarah handed Marcus a device that looked like a sophisticated smartphone but was apparently designed for security purposes rather than communication. "This is a security scanner that will detect electronic devices, recently installed equipment, or other anomalies that might indicate tampering or surveillance. You'll use it to scan any areas you plan to work in before beginning maintenance activities." Marcus examined the device, noting its similarity to diagnostic tools he had used for troubleshooting electrical problems in marine systems. "And if I detect something unusual?" Sarah's response carried the authority of someone who had extensive experience managing security incidents. "You contact me immediately and avoid disturbing anything until I can assess the situation. Your safety is more important than maintaining any schedule or completing any repair job." The security briefing continued for another hour, covering emergency procedures, communication protocols, and threat recognition techniques that would help Marcus operate safely in an environment where routine maintenance work intersected with international business operations that sometimes attracted unwanted attention. By the time the briefing concluded, Marcus felt confident that Victoria and James had invested in comprehensive security measures that would protect him, while allowing him to focus on the technical aspects of fleet maintenance rather than worrying constantly about potential threats. His first maintenance assignment was routine service on the Meridian, beginning with oil changes, filter replacements, and system inspections that would familiarize him with the yacht's mechanical systems and operational characteristics. The work was similar to maintenance he had performed on other boats, but the quality of components and precision of engineering were immediately apparent. As Marcus worked, he found himself appreciating the difference between maintaining equipment that was designed for reliability and working on systems that were held together through improvisation and determination. Every component on the Meridian was precisely engineered, properly installed, and designed to work seamlessly with related systems. The contrast with his previous work was dramatic, but it also highlighted how much he had learned about problem-solving and mechanical troubleshooting during his years of fixing equipment that other people had given up on. The skills he had developed working on impossible repairs were directly applicable to maintaining sophisticated systems, but the quality of components and engineering made his job significantly easier and more satisfying. By noon, Marcus had completed the routine maintenance tasks and begun a comprehensive inspection of the Meridian's systems to identify potential problems before they could affect the yacht's reliability. The inspection revealed several minor issues that could be addressed during scheduled maintenance, but nothing that would require immediate attention or emergency repairs. As he documented his findings in the maintenance log that James had provided, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his professional circumstances had changed in less than a week. The transition from fixing other people's problems for survival wages to maintaining a fleet of luxury yachts for a salary that would transform his life seemed almost too good to be true. But the work itself felt familiar and satisfying, combining mechanical skills he had spent years developing with operational responsibilities that challenged him to think systematically about complex problems. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus was working in a job that utilized his abilities fully, while providing compensation that reflected the value of his contributions. That evening, as he prepared to leave the marina and return to his apartment above the repair shop for one of the last times, Marcus received a phone call from Victoria that would add another dimension to his understanding of the opportunity she had provided. "Marcus," Victoria said, her voice carrying excitement that suggested significant positive developments. "I just received confirmation that one of my most important clients wants to schedule a meeting aboard the sanctuary next month. This will be your first opportunity to support a major business operation, and if everything goes well, it could lead to additional responsibilities and compensation." Marcus felt his pulse quicken at the prospect of supporting business operations that would test his abilities under real-world conditions. What kind of support would be required? Victoria's response indicated that the upcoming meeting would involve more than routine maintenance and mechanical reliability. "The client requires absolute assurance that all systems aboard the sanctuary are functioning perfectly and that the vessel is completely secure from surveillance or tampering. Your role would be to oversee all technical aspects of the meeting, from engine performance to communication systems to environmental controls." Marcus understood that Victoria was offering him the opportunity to demonstrate his value beyond routine maintenance work, potentially opening doors to additional responsibilities and career advancement that he couldn't currently imagine. "I'll make sure the sanctuary is ready for whatever your client needs." Victoria's confidence in his abilities was both gratifying and intimidating, representing trust that Marcus was determined to justify through performance that exceeded expectations. "Marcus, I believe this meeting will prove to both of us that we made the right decision in working together." As Marcus walked through the marina toward his truck, passing the expensive yachts that no longer seemed to belong to a different universe from his own experience, he found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him from financial desperation to professional opportunity. The path had been neither straight nor predictable, but each step had prepared him for challenges and responsibilities that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Tomorrow would bring new maintenance tasks, additional learning opportunities, and continued preparation for the business meeting that would test his abilities under conditions that he had never encountered before. But tonight, Marcus Rivera was no longer the man who lived invisibly above a repair shop, fixing other people's broken dreams for barely enough money to survive. Tonight, he was someone whose skills had value, whose expertise was trusted, and whose future stretched ahead with possibilities that seemed limited only by his willingness to believe in himself. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the engine room of the sanctuary at 4 in the morning, conducting final systems checks before Victoria's most important client meeting of the year. The past month had transformed him from a struggling mechanic into someone who understood the intricate relationships between mechanical reliability, business success, and personal security in ways that would have seemed impossible during his years of desperation. The client arriving that morning was Elena Vasquez, the CEO of a multinational mining consortium whose operations in South America had made her both extraordinarily wealthy and perpetually concerned about industrial espionage. Victoria's consulting firm had been advising Elena's company on expansion strategies that could be worth billions of dollars, but only if the information remained confidential until the appropriate agreements were signed and regulatory approvals obtained. Marcus had spent the previous week ensuring that every system aboard the sanctuary operated flawlessly, from the primary engines that would keep them positioned safely offshore to the sophisticated communication equipment that would allow Elena to conduct business with her operations in 3 different countries. The responsibility was unlike anything he had previously experienced, but the confidence Victoria and James had shown in his abilities had gradually replaced his anxiety with determination to exceed their expectations. The security preparations had been equally comprehensive. Sarah Chen had conducted multiple sweeps of the vessel to ensure that no surveillance devices had been planted aboard, and she had installed temporary countermeasures that would prevent electronic eavesdropping during the sensitive discussions that would take place throughout the day. Marcus's role included monitoring all technical systems to ensure that the security measures didn't interfere with the yacht's operational capabilities. At 6:30, Victoria arrived aboard the sanctuary accompanied by Elena Vasquez and 2 assistants, who carried themselves with the careful alertness of people accustomed to operating in environments where information was both valuable and dangerous. Elena was a woman in her late 50s whose silver hair and elegant business attire couldn't disguise the fact that she had built her fortune through decisive action in challenging circumstances. "Ms. Vasquez," Victoria said as they gathered in the main salon, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Rivera, our chief marine engineer. Marcus has ensured that all systems aboard the sanctuary are operating perfectly for our meeting today." Elena extended her hand to Marcus with the firm grip of someone who understood that technical competence was essential for business success. "Mr. Rivera, Victoria tells me that you solved an engine problem that 3 specialists couldn't diagnose. That kind of problem-solving ability is exactly what we need for the challenges we're discussing today." Marcus felt the familiar mixture of pride and responsibility that came with recognition from people whose judgment could significantly impact his career prospects. "Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. Everything aboard the sanctuary is ready to support whatever discussions you need to have." Elena's smile carried the warmth of someone who appreciated competence and reliability in an uncertain world. "Excellent. The matters we're discussing today require absolute confidentiality and complete technical reliability. I'm grateful to know that both are available aboard this vessel." As the sanctuary moved away from the marina and headed toward the deep water where the day's meetings would take place, Marcus monitored the yacht systems from the bridge while Victoria and Elena began their discussions in the conference room below. The combination of responsibilities was challenging, requiring him to maintain awareness of mechanical performance while ensuring that the vessel remained positioned properly for both security and communication requirements. The first sign of trouble came at 9:15, when Marcus noticed an unusual vibration in the primary engine that hadn't been present during his pre-departure inspections. The vibration was subtle, barely detectable through the sophisticated engine mounting system, but his experience with mechanical problems had taught him to investigate anomalies immediately rather than hoping they would resolve themselves. Marcus descended to the engine room and began a systematic diagnostic procedure, checking fluid levels, belt tension, and electrical connections, while the engine continued to operate normally in all other respects. The vibration persisted, suggesting a developing problem that could affect the yacht's reliability if it wasn't identified and corrected quickly. After 20 minutes of investigation, Marcus discovered the source of the vibration. One of the engine mounts that he had inspected during his initial maintenance work was beginning to show signs of fatigue, creating a slight imbalance in the engine's mounting system that would gradually worsen if not addressed immediately. The discovery presented Marcus with a complex decision. Replacing the failing mount would require shutting down the primary engine for approximately 2 hours, during which time the sanctuary would be dependent on its secondary propulsion system. The timing was problematic because Elena's most sensitive discussions were scheduled for the late morning, when reliable positioning and communication capabilities would be essential. But Marcus also understood that ignoring the developing problem could result in complete engine failure during the afternoon, when Elena would be conducting video conferences with mining operations in Chile and Peru. The consequences of mechanical problems during those discussions could cost Elena's consortium millions of dollars in delayed decisions and missed opportunities. Marcus contacted Victoria through the internal communication system and explained the situation, emphasizing that immediate repair would prevent more serious problems later in the day. Victoria's response reflected her understanding that technical reliability was more important than meeting schedules when the stakes were as high as they were during Elena's visit. Marcus, do whatever you need to do to ensure that we don't have mechanical problems during this afternoon's conferences. Elena's business operations depend on precise timing and reliable communication, and we can't afford to disappoint her. Marcus began the engine mount replacement procedure with the focused intensity of someone who understood that his performance during the next 2 hours would significantly influence his reputation and career prospects. The work required precision and efficiency, complicated by the need to perform the repair while the yacht remained operational using its secondary systems. The replacement proceeded smoothly, aided by Marcus's growing familiarity with the sanctuary's mechanical systems and the quality of components that made precision work both possible and predictable. By 11:30, the new mount was installed, and the primary engine was running more smoothly than it had in weeks. When Marcus returned to the bridge to report the successful completion of the repair, he found Victoria and Elena reviewing documents that contained charts and financial projections related to mining operations throughout South America. The scope of Elena's business interests was impressive, encompassing extraction projects that employed thousands of people and generated revenues that supported entire regional economies. Marcus, Victoria said as he approached their position near the navigation station, Elena has been asking about your background and how you developed the diagnostic skills that allowed you to solve our engine problems so effectively. Elena looked up from the document she had been reviewing and focused her attention on Marcus with the kind of direct gaze that suggested genuine interest in his professional development. Mr. Rivera, Victoria tells me that you don't have conventional marine engineering credentials, but that you've developed expertise through practical experience with challenging repair problems. Marcus felt the familiar discomfort that came with discussing his unconventional career path with people whose success had followed more traditional routes. That's correct, Ms. Vasquez. Most of my knowledge comes from working on equipment that other mechanics had given up on, which taught me to look for problems that might not be obvious during standard diagnostic procedures. Elena's expression indicated approval rather than skepticism regarding his non-traditional qualifications. Mr. Rivera, some of the most valuable people in my organization are individuals who developed expertise through necessity rather than formal education. The ability to solve problems that others can't solve is worth more than any degree or certification. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Patterson, who had been monitoring communication systems to ensure that Elena's video conferences would proceed without technical difficulties. Elena, we're ready for your first call with Santiago. All communication systems are operating perfectly, and Marcus has resolved a potential engine issue that could have caused problems this afternoon. Elena nodded approvingly, her expression indicating satisfaction with the level of technical support she was receiving aboard the sanctuary. Excellent. The discussions I'm having today will determine whether my consortium proceeds with a $2 billion expansion of our operations in Peru and Chile. Reliable communication and positioning are essential for demonstrating our operational capabilities to potential partners. As Elena moved to the conference room to begin her first video call of the day, Marcus returned to the engine room to monitor the performance of the replaced mount and ensure that no additional problems developed during the critical afternoon discussions. The responsibility he was carrying was unlike anything from his previous career, but the confidence that Victoria and Elena had expressed in his abilities made him determined to justify their trust through flawless performance. The afternoon proceeded exactly as planned, with Elena conducting a series of video conferences that involved mining engineers in Chile, financial analysts in New York, and government officials in Peru. The technical systems aboard the sanctuary performed perfectly, providing Elena with the reliable communication platform she needed to coordinate complex business decisions across multiple time zones and jurisdictions. During a break between conferences, Elena approached Marcus while he was conducting routine system checks on the bridge. Mr. Rivera, I've been impressed with the technical support you've provided today. Victoria mentioned that you might be interested in additional consulting opportunities that would utilize your problem-solving skills in other contexts. Marcus felt his pulse quicken at the suggestion that Elena might be offering him opportunities beyond his current responsibilities with Victoria's fleet. What kind of consulting opportunities? Elena's expression grew serious as she considered how to explain business opportunities that existed in industries Marcus had never encountered. My mining operations employ thousands of people who work with sophisticated mechanical equipment in challenging environments. We constantly face diagnostic and repair challenges that require the kind of creative problem-solving you demonstrated with Victoria's engine problems. Marcus tried to imagine himself providing technical consulting for mining operations that spanned multiple countries and employed industrial equipment he had never seen. Ms. Vasquez, I appreciate the suggestion, but I don't have any experience with mining equipment or industrial operations. Elena's smile was encouraging rather than dismissive. Mr. Rivera, mechanical principles are universal, and problem-solving skills transfer between industries more easily than most people realize. What I'm suggesting is a consulting arrangement that would allow you to apply your diagnostic expertise to equipment problems that our regular maintenance teams can't solve. The opportunity Elena was describing sounded both exciting and intimidating, representing a level of professional advancement that would have seemed impossible during his years of struggle at Sal's repair shop. What would be involved in this consulting arrangement? Elena consulted her phone, apparently reviewing calendar information related to her upcoming travel and business commitments. I would need you to visit 3 of our operations over the next 6 months, spending approximately 1 week at each site to assess maintenance procedures and provide training for our technical teams. The compensation would be $50,000 per consultation, plus travel expenses and accommodations. Marcus felt his breath catch as Elena described consulting fees that exceeded his previous annual salary for work that would require only 3 weeks of his time. The financial implications were staggering, but the professional opportunities were equally significant. Ms. Vasquez, that's an incredibly generous offer, but I need to ensure that additional consulting work wouldn't interfere with my responsibilities to Victoria's fleet. Elena nodded approvingly, her expression suggesting that Marcus's concern about conflicting commitments demonstrated the kind of professional integrity she valued in business relationships. I've already discussed this possibility with Victoria, and she's agreed that your consulting work for my operations would actually enhance your value to her organization by exposing you to different types of mechanical systems and problem-solving challenges. Victoria appeared at Marcus's shoulder, having concluded her monitoring of Elena's business discussions for the afternoon. Marcus, Elena's proposal represents exactly the kind of professional development opportunity that will make you even more valuable as our chief marine engineer. The experience you gain working with industrial equipment will enhance your diagnostic skills and expose you to engineering approaches that could benefit our yacht maintenance operations. As the sanctuary returned to the marina that evening, Marcus found himself contemplating opportunities that seemed to exist in a different universe from his circumstances just months earlier. The combination of his position with Victoria's fleet and Elena's consulting opportunities would transform his financial situation completely, while providing professional experiences that would enhance his skills and reputation in ways he couldn't fully imagine. That night, Marcus called Miguel to share the news about the consulting opportunities and discuss plans for their upcoming visit the following weekend. Carmen's agreement to increase his custody time had made regular visits possible, and the improved financial stability from his new career was allowing him to plan activities and experiences that would have been impossible during his years of struggle. "Dad, that sounds amazing," Miguel said with the enthusiasm that only 12-year-olds could generate for their parents' professional achievements. "Does this mean you'll get to travel to other countries and work on giant machines that dig up mountains?" Marcus laughed at his son's characterization of mining operations. But he also felt proud that Miguel was excited about his career prospects rather than embarrassed by his circumstances. "It means I'll get to solve mechanical problems in places I never thought I'd visit, and when you're older, maybe you can come with me on some of these trips." Miguel's excitement was infectious, reminding Marcus that professional success was meaningful, primarily because of the opportunities it created for relationships and experiences with the people he loved most. "Can I tell my friends at school that my dad is going to be an international consultant who fixes machines that nobody else can fix?" Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion at the pride in Miguel's voice, remembering the years when his son had been embarrassed to discuss his father's career or circumstances with classmates and teachers. "You can tell them whatever you want, buddy. I'm just grateful that I finally have work that makes both of us proud." After their conversation ended, Marcus sat in his new apartment overlooking the marina, watching the lights of Victoria's fleet reflect off the water and thinking about the journey that had brought him from desperation to opportunity. The path had been neither direct nor predictable, but every challenge and setback had contributed to the skills and perspective that made his current success possible. 2 weeks later, Marcus boarded a flight to Santiago, Chile, beginning his first consulting assignment for Elena's mining consortium. The briefing materials Elena had provided described equipment problems at a copper extraction facility that employed 2,000 people and generated millions of dollars in revenue each day that operations continued without interruption. The specific problem involved a series of mechanical failures in the primary ore processing equipment that had confounded the facility's maintenance team for several months. Production efficiency had declined significantly, and the local engineers were recommending replacement of the entire processing system at a cost of $40 million. Elena's invitation for Marcus to assess the situation reflected her belief that expensive equipment replacement might not be necessary if the root cause of the mechanical failures could be identified and corrected through more targeted repairs. The potential cost savings were substantial, but the pressure to provide accurate diagnosis and effective solutions was correspondingly intense. Marcus arrived at the mining facility after a 2-day journey that included flights to Santiago and then a smaller aircraft to the remote location where the extraction operations were situated. The scale of the industrial complex was unlike anything he had previously encountered, with processing equipment that dwarfed the largest yacht engines and operational requirements that demanded reliability under conditions that would destroy less robust machinery. The facility's chief engineer was Carlos Mendoza, a man in his early 40s whose experience with mining equipment was extensive but whose frustration with the current mechanical problems was obvious from their first conversation. "Mr. Rivera, I'll be honest with you. When Ms. Vasquez told me she was bringing in a yacht mechanic to solve problems that our engineering team can't fix, I was skeptical. But she assured me that you have diagnostic skills that might provide new perspectives on our equipment failures." Marcus appreciated Carlos's direct acknowledgement of his skepticism, preferring honest doubt to polite deference that might conceal important information or concerns. "Carlos, I understand your reservations, and I want you to know that I'm here to learn from your expertise as much as to provide fresh perspectives on your mechanical problems." Carlos's expression softened slightly, suggesting that Marcus's humble approach to their collaboration was more effective than claims of superior expertise would have been. "The problem we're facing involves bearing failures in our primary crushers that occur much more frequently than the manufacturer's specifications would predict. We've replaced the bearings multiple times, but they continue to fail after only a few months of operation instead of lasting the 2 years they're designed for." Marcus nodded, recognizing the pattern of mechanical failures that seemed to have obvious causes but resisted conventional solutions. "Have you examined the mounting and alignment systems for the crushers? Sometimes bearing failures are symptoms of problems in supporting systems rather than defects in the bearings themselves." Carlos consulted a tablet that contained maintenance records and engineering diagrams for the problematic equipment. "We've checked alignment multiple times and always found it within acceptable tolerances. The mounting systems appear to be functioning correctly according to all standard diagnostic procedures." Marcus spent the next 2 days examining the crusher systems with the same systematic approach he had used for diagnosing Victoria's yacht engine problems. The scale was dramatically different, but the principles of mechanical troubleshooting remained consistent across industries and applications. On the 3rd day, Marcus discovered what Carlos's engineering team had missed. The foundation beneath one of the primary crushers was settling at a rate so gradual that standard alignment checks couldn't detect the movement, but the cumulative effect over several months was enough to stress the bearing systems beyond their design limits. "Carlos," Marcus said as they examined the foundation measurements he had taken using precision instruments borrowed from the facility's surveying department, "your bearings aren't failing because of manufacturing defects or operational stress. They're failing because the entire crusher is slowly sinking into unstable ground." Carlos studied the measurement data with the focused attention of someone trying to understand how a relatively simple problem had evaded detection by experienced engineers. "But our foundation inspections showed solid bedrock beneath all the processing equipment." Marcus pointed to a pattern in the measurement data that told the story of gradual subsidence caused by water infiltration into fractures in the bedrock. "The bedrock is solid, but water from your processing operations is seeping into hairline cracks and gradually washing away the material that supports the foundation. The movement is too slow to detect during routine inspections, but it's fast enough to destroy bearings that require precise alignment." The solution Marcus proposed was both simpler and less expensive than the equipment replacement Carlos's team had recommended. Installing drainage systems to redirect water away from the foundation and using precision jacking to restore proper alignment would cost approximately $2 million and could be completed during a scheduled maintenance shutdown. Carlos's expression reflected amazement at how a problem that had confounded his engineering team for months could be solved through relatively straightforward civil engineering rather than expensive equipment replacement. "Mr. Rivera, if your diagnosis is correct, you've just saved our operation $38 million and prevented months of production delays." Marcus felt the satisfaction that came with solving problems that others had declared impossible, but he also understood that success with one consulting assignment would lead to expectations and opportunities that would test his abilities in new ways. The diagnosis is only valuable if the solution works. Let's implement the drainage and alignment corrections. Then monitor the bearing performance to confirm that we've addressed the root cause. The foundation repairs proceeded exactly as Marcus had predicted, with drainage systems redirecting water away from the critical foundation areas and precision jacking restoring the crushers to proper alignment. Within 2 weeks of completing the work, bearing temperatures and vibration levels returned to normal ranges, confirming that the mechanical failures had been symptoms of civil engineering problems rather than equipment defects. Elena arrived at the facility to review the results of Marcus's consulting work and assess the effectiveness of his diagnostic approach. Her satisfaction with the cost savings and operational improvements was obvious, but her interest in Marcus's problem-solving methodology suggested that additional consulting opportunities would be forthcoming. "Marcus," Elena said as they toured the repaired processing systems, "your approach to this problem demonstrates exactly the kind of creative thinking that my operations need for addressing complex challenges. I'd like to discuss expanding our consulting arrangement to include additional facilities and different types of mechanical problems." Marcus felt his career prospects expanding in directions he couldn't have imagined during his years of struggle, but he also understood that success would require him to continue developing skills and knowledge that would allow him to solve increasingly complex problems. "I'd be very interested in additional consulting opportunities, Elena. This experience has taught me that mechanical principles really do transfer between industries, even when the scale and complexity are dramatically different." Elena's smile carried the confidence of someone who had identified a valuable resource and intended to utilize it fully. "Marcus, I think we're just beginning to discover what you're capable of achieving when you're given problems that deserve your talents." As Marcus prepared to return to California and resume his responsibilities with Victoria's yacht fleet, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since the morning when he had diagnosed engine mount problems that 3 specialists had missed. The journey from survival to success had required not just technical skills, but the willingness to believe that his abilities had value beyond the modest circumstances where he had been applying them. The flight home provided time for Marcus to think about the future he was building and the responsibilities he was accepting. Miguel would be visiting the following weekend, and Marcus was looking forward to sharing stories about his consulting work and discussing the possibilities that seemed to open new doors with each successful project he completed. But most importantly, Marcus was beginning to understand that fixing impossible problems wasn't just a way to make a living. It was a way to contribute something meaningful to the world, to help other people achieve their goals, and to build relationships based on mutual respect and shared success rather than the desperation and charity that had characterized too many years of his adult life. The marina looked different when Marcus returned from Chile, not because anything had changed physically, but because his relationship to the expensive yachts and sophisticated equipment had evolved from admiration and envy to professional familiarity and confidence. He belonged in this environment now, not as someone who aspired to wealth he couldn't achieve, but as someone whose skills were essential for maintaining the systems that made other people's success possible. Victoria was waiting for him at the dock when he arrived at the marina, eager to hear about his consulting experience and discuss plans for additional projects that would utilize his expanding expertise. "Marcus, Elena called me yesterday to report that your work in Chile exceeded all expectations. She wants to schedule consulting visits to facilities in Peru and Colombia, and she's recommended your services to other consortium members who have similar operational challenges." Marcus felt the momentum of success building in ways that seemed to promise opportunities beyond anything he had allowed himself to imagine. "Victoria, I'm grateful for everything you've made possible, but I want to ensure that additional consulting work doesn't compromise my responsibilities to your fleet." Victoria's expression indicated satisfaction rather than concern about Marcus's expanding professional commitments. "Marcus, Your success as a consultant enhances your value to our organization and demonstrates that our investment in your career development is generating returns for everyone involved. I want you to pursue every opportunity that interests you, knowing that your primary responsibilities remain with our fleet maintenance operations. As Marcus resumed his work maintaining Victoria's yachts while planning for additional consulting assignments in South America, he found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Miguel on the Santa Monica Pier. When his son had asked why he always tried to fix things that were already broken beyond repair. Now Marcus understood that fixing impossible things wasn't about the specific problems he solved, but about the confidence and skills that developed through refusing to accept limitations that other people considered permanent. Every impossible repair had prepared him for the next challenge, building expertise and reputation that eventually opened doors to opportunities he couldn't have imagined when he was simply trying to survive. The man who had once lived invisibly above a repair shop, fixing other people's broken dreams for survival wages, had become someone whose skills were valued internationally and whose future seemed limited only by his willingness to take on increasingly complex challenges. And the best part was knowing that Miguel would grow up watching his father succeed through persistence, creativity, and the determination to make broken things work again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.